The musty scent of old leather and wood polish filled the air as I unlocked the front door of Harrison's Fine Antiques for the first time as its owner. Dust motes danced in the early morning light streaming through the grimy Victorian windows, illuminating shelves crowded with what my family had dismissed as worthless junk. I'm Rachel Harrison, 33, and until last week, I've been struggling to make it as an art history professor at a small community college. Now, thanks to my grandfather's surprising will, I owned a century-old antique shop that my more successful relatives couldn't wait to distance themselves from. What a dump, my cousin Victoria had sneered at the will reading. I can't believe Grandpa left us the beach house while Rachel got stuck with this prehistoric mess. I ran my fingers along the mahogany desk, remembering the hours I'd spent here as a child, listening to Grandpa's stories about each piece. He taught me about period furniture, rare books, the art of restoration. While my cousins spent their summers at exclusive camps, I've been learning the difference between Chippendale and Queen Anne styles. My phone buzzed. Another text from Aunt Mary. Be reasonable, Rachel. Let us buy you out. That shop is a liability, and you know it. I ignored it, just like I'd ignored the last dozen messages from family members suddenly interested in the store they'd mocked for years. Something about their urgent desire to help me sell didn't sit right. The shop's bell chimed as Marcus, my grandfather's old assistant, shuffled in. At 75, he'd worked here longer than I'd been alive. Ready to start the inventory? He asked, his eyes twinkling behind wire-rimmed glasses. Actually, I pulled out my laptop. I was hoping you could help me understand these. I opened the folder of digital photos I'd taken of Grandpa's private ledgers, books I'd found hidden behind a false panel in his office. Marcus adjusted his glasses, peering at the screen. His expression changed subtly. Where did you find these? Behind the portrait of great-grandfather Harrison, the one that's hung in the office since 1923. I pointed to a series of entries. These codes, they're different from the normal inventory system. Your grandfather, Marcus said carefully, had a special way of recording certain items. Items that weren't meant for regular display. What kind of items? Before he could answer, the shop's bell chimed again. A tall man in an impeccable suit entered, looking distinctly out of place among the dusty antiques. Ms. Harrison, he extended a hand. James Chen, from Christie's auction house. I believe you've been expecting me. I hadn't been, but I shook his hand anyway. I'm sorry, Mr. Chen, but I don't recall. Your grandfather arranged this meeting, he explained. 6 months ago. He was quite insistent that I come exactly 1 week after. Well, he gestured vaguely, acknowledging Grandpa's passing. Marcus suddenly became very interested in cleaning his glasses. A little too interested. Please, I said, leading Mr. Chen to the office. Tell me more about this arrangement. The office was exactly as Grandpa had left it. Leather chairs worn smooth with age, walls lined with reference books, and that portrait of great-grandfather Harrison watching over everything. Your grandfather contacted me regarding a very specific collection. Mr. Chen began, placing his briefcase on the desk. He mentioned something about a coded inventory system. I glanced at Marcus, who gave a slight nod. Pulling out my laptop again, I showed Mr. Chen the ledgers. His eyes widened as he scrolled through the entries. Extraordinary. And you have documentation for all of these. Documentation of what? I asked. These codes are the most sophisticated authentication system I've seen in 40 years of dealing with private collections, he finished. Your grandfather wasn't just running an antique shop, Miss Harrison. He was operating one of the most remarkable private museums I've ever encountered. My head spun. Museum. These codes, he pointed to the screen, they're not just inventory numbers. They're provenance records, history, ownership chains. Your grandfather was documenting something extraordinary. The shop's bell chimed a third time. This time, it was my cousin Peter, looking flushed and anxious. Rachel, thank God you're here. Listen, about the shop. Not now, Peter. I cut him off, noticing how his eyes darted around the office, lingering on certain spots. But the offer, surely you've considered. The family's offer to buy the shop. Mr. Chen raised an eyebrow. The offer that came immediately after your grandfather's passing, before any proper valuation could be done. Peter's face went pale. How do you know about that? I asked Mr. Chen. Because, Ms. Harrison, your grandfather warned me they would try. just as he warned me about the false inventory records they've been using to hide the true value of this collection. I thought about all those summer days watching Grandpa meticulously record details in his book, about the late nights when he closed the shop early for private viewing, about the careful way he taught me to read those coded entries, never explaining why they were so important. "Peter," I said quietly, "I think you should leave." "You don't understand," he protested. "We're trying to protect you. This shop, it's not just a dusty antique store." I finished. "No, it's not. And I think you know exactly what it is." After Peter left, Mr. Chen opened his briefcase. "Your grandfather left specific instructions. 1 week after the will reading, I was to come here and help you understand what you've really inherited. Shall we begin?" I looked at Marcus, who was smiling now, at the portrait of great-grandfather Harrison, whose eyes seemed to hold a secret, at the ledgers that contained who knew what revelations. "Yes," I said, feeling the weight of a century of family history settling on my shoulders. "Show me everything." As Mr. Chen began explaining the true nature of my inheritance, I realized this was just the beginning. My family thought they'd saddled me with a burden. Instead, Grandpa had left me something beyond price, but only if I was smart enough to unlock its secrets. And judging by my relatives' sudden intense interest in this worthless shop, I had a feeling those secrets were bigger than anyone had imagined. As Mr. Chen spread the documentation across my grandfather's desk, the true scope of what I'd inherited began to emerge. The shop wasn't just a collection of antiques, it was a carefully curated archive of historical artifacts, each with a story more incredible than the last. "Your grandfather," Mr. Chen explained, "was what we call a shadow collector. He specialized in preserving items that had disappeared from public record, pieces that historians thought were lost forever." He pulled out a series of photographs. "These items, coded in your grandfather's ledgers, represent some of the most significant historical finds of the past 50 years. But instead of selling them for millions or donating them to museums, he kept them safe, hidden in plain sight." "But why?" I asked, struggling to process what I was hearing. "Why hide them?" Marcus stepped forward. "Because some things are too important to be locked away in private collections or lost in museum warehouses. Your great-grandfather started this tradition during World War II, protecting art and artifacts from those who would destroy or exploit them." The shop's bell chimed again. This time it was Aunt Mary, followed by what looked like half the family. "Rachel," she began imperiously, "this has gone on long enough. We have the paperwork ready for the sale." "I assume," Mr. Chen interrupted smoothly, "you're referring to the fraudulent paperwork that undervalues the collection by roughly $300 million? The room went silent. Even the antique grandfather clock seemed to hold its breath. That's ridiculous," Uncle George sputtered. "This shop isn't worth the main vase you've been using as an umbrella stand." Mr. Chen pointed to a seemingly modest piece by the door. "That alone is worth $2.3 million. The reproduction Rembrandt sketch in the back office, original, verified through provenance records your father kept. Value, approximately $8 million. My cousins' faces had gone from smug to shocked. Victoria actually had to sit down. "But that's just the beginning," Mr. Chen continued. "The real value lies in what's hidden behind these walls. Rachel, would you like to see your grandfather's actual collection?" I nodded, still processing the revelation that the shop I'd grown up in was essentially a secret museum. Mr. Chen turned to the portrait of great-grandfather Harrison. "Your grandfather said you already found the first hidden panel. There are 12 more. Shall we?" Over the next hour, as my stunned family watched, we discovered hidden compartments throughout the shop. Behind panels, under floorboards, inside hollow furniture, each space revealed new treasures. Lost manuscripts, ancient artifacts, pieces of history thought destroyed or stolen. "This is impossible," Aunt Mary whispered as Mr. Chen authenticated a previously unknown Shakespeare folio. "George, how could we not have known?" Uncle George looked sick. "The buyout offer, if we had succeeded. You would have unknowingly sold priceless historical artifacts to private collectors who've been trying to locate this collection for decades," Mr. Chen finished, "which is exactly what your father was preventing." I picked up one of Grandpa's ledgers, understanding now why he'd spent so many hours teaching me his special notation system. All those summer days cataloging inventory. He was preparing you, Marcus said softly, teaching you how to protect these pieces just as his father taught him. My phone buzzed, messages pouring in from art dealers and museum curators who'd somehow caught wind of the revelation. The secret of Harrison's fine antiques was out. What happens now? Victoria asked, her voice small. I looked around the shop, at the history hidden within its walls, at the legacy my grandfather had entrusted to me. Now, we honor Grandpa's work. We protect these pieces, make sure they're documented and preserved properly. We? Peter asked hopefully. Those who understand what this collection really means, I said firmly. This isn't about money. It's about preservation. About doing what's right. Over the next few months, the true extent of my grandfather's work emerged. The shop became a sensation in the art world, but not in the way my family had initially hoped. Instead of selling off the collection, I established the Harrison Foundation for Historical Preservation. The shop's ground floor remained a working antique store, maintaining its cover as a modest family business. But the upper floors were transformed into a secure research facility where historians and scholars could study pieces that have been lost to history. My family's reaction varied. Some, like Victoria and Peter, eventually came to understand and respect what their grandfather had built. They joined the foundation's board, using their business skills to help protect our legacy. Others, like Aunt Mary, couldn't get past the lost opportunity of what the collection could have sold for. 1 year after the revelation, I sat in my grandfather's office, my office now, looking at a new portrait hanging beside great-grandfather Harrison's. In it, Grandpa sat in his favorite chair, surrounded by his beloved antiques, a slight smile playing on his lips. He would be proud, Marcus said, bringing in our afternoon tea. You've not only preserved the collection, you've given it purpose. He was right. The Harrison Foundation had already helped authenticate and protect dozens of historical artifacts worldwide. Our methodology had become a model for private preservation efforts globally. My phone buzzed. A message from Mr. Chen about a newly discovered collection in Prague that needed our expertise. The Harrison legacy was growing. You know what Grandpa used to say? I smiled at Marcus. The true value of an antique isn't in its price tag, but in the story it tells and the history it preserves. The shop's bell chimed as a group of graduate students arrived for their research session. Among them, I recognized that same spark of wonder I felt as a child, listening to Grandpa's stories. Looking around at what my worthless inheritance had become, I realized that sometimes the greatest treasures are the ones that can't be sold, the ones that remind us where we came from and show us who we can become. The antique shop wasn't just a collection of valuable items. It was a testament to the power of looking beyond surface value, of protecting what matters, of understanding that true worth isn't always measured in dollars and cents. And as I prepared to guide another generation through the secrets of Harrison's fine antiques, I knew that this preservation of history, this protection of stories, was the real inheritance my grandfather had left me. Not bad for a family failure with a dusty old shop. Late that evening, as I locked up, I added a new entry to my grandfather's ledger system, not for an antique or artifact, but for something equally precious, a legacy of purpose passed down through generations, growing stronger with each passing day. After all, some inheritances aren't about what you own. They're about what you choose to protect. And thanks to my grandfather's wisdom, I'd inherited something far more valuable than just a shop full of antiques. I'd inherited a mission, a purpose, a chance to make history by preserving it. And that, as my grandfather would say, is truly priceless.